My husband said it casually, almost bored. You wouldn't last a week without me. He wasn't angry when he said it. That's what should have scared me. He said it the way people state facts. Gravity, weather, me, dependent. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him and nodded. That was the night everything broke open. I left the next morning with one suitcase and no speech prepared. Not because I was unplanned or impulsive, because explanations are currency and I was done paying. He was still asleep when I walked out. One arm flung across the empty side of the bed, like he expected me to still be there when he woke up. Like gravity would return me to position. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I wanted silence to do the talking. By noon, my phone was already vibrating like a trapped insect. Not him. His boss. Then his mother. Then his father. Missed calls stacking up like dominoes. Voicemails piling in before I even finished listening to the first. By sunset, the bank joined in. That's when I understood something important. He didn't mean I couldn't survive without him. He meant I couldn't survive without what he controlled. And the moment I stepped out of line, the entire system panicked. Let me tell you who my husband is, because context matters. He is wealthy, not loud wealthy, not new money flash, old structures, quiet authority, the kind of money that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't have to. He built his life like a fortress. Business on one side, family legacy on the other. Me in the middle, decorative, efficient, silent. I was not stupid. I was not naive. But I was strategically minimized. My name was never on anything important. Accounts were simplified. Investments were too complex. Decisions were already handled. He didn't forbid me from working. He simply made it unnecessary. And then inconvenient. And then irrelevant. Comfort is a very effective leash. And I wore it for years without noticing the weight. When he challenged me, we were standing in the kitchen. Marble counters. Imported espresso machine. A house that looked like control. I had questioned a transfer. A routine question. Where did this money go? He didn't raise his voice. He smiled. Why do you worry about things you don't understand? He asked. That sentence has teeth. I told him I wanted more transparency, more access, more agency. That's when he leaned back against the counter, crossed his arms, and delivered the line like a verdict. You couldn't last a week without me. Not we. Not this lifestyle. Me. I saw it then, clear as glass. I wasn't a partner. I was a dependency experiment. So I left. By the second day, his boss called 3 times before noon. I didn't answer. By the third day, his mother left a voicemail that started with concern and ended with accusation. You're upsetting him, she said. This isn't like you. No, it wasn't. By the 4th day, his father called from a private number. That one I answered. He didn't ask where I was. He asked what I had done. I said nothing. Silence is very uncomfortable for people who are used to control. The bank called on day 5. That call mattered. Mrs. Carter, the woman said, carefully polite. We need to verify several recent transactions. I told her to be specific. There was a pause, a professional recalibration. Your husband attempted to move funds from accounts that require dual authorization. My name. My authorization. I laughed. Once. Short. So it worked? I asked. Another pause. Yes, she said. It did. That's when I understood the real reason for the chaos. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost access. He finally called that night. No preamble. No apology. You're making this very difficult, he said. I pictured him pacing. Phone pressed too tightly to his ear. Jaw set. The man who had never had to negotiate with consequences. I'm not doing anything, I replied. I'm not there. Silence. Then, colder. Sharper. You think this proves something? I smiled. He couldn't see it. That made it better. It already has, I said. He escalated after that. Texts, emails, indirect threats dressed as concern. People are asking questions. This affects more than just us. You're being emotional. There it was. The final card. Emotion. As if logic had abandoned me the moment I stopped complying. But here's the truth he never learned. I didn't leave because I was emotional. I left because I was precise. By the end of the week, the calls stopped coming from him. They came from everywhere else. His assistant, his lawyer, a man from the bank who suddenly knew my name very well. Everyone wanted something. Information, cooperation, reassurance. No one asked how I was. That's how you know exactly what role you played. On the 7th day, I sat alone in a rented apartment with borrowed furniture and a cup of bad coffee. I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. The system had stopped spinning. Not because the crisis was over, because they were regrouping. And for the first time in years, I wasn't inside the machine. I was watching it. He was wrong about one thing. I didn't just survive the week. I dismantled the assumption behind it. And that was only the beginning. I didn't block anyone. That's important. People assume silence requires walls. It doesn't. Silence just requires restraint. I let every call ring. I let every voicemail stack. I let the timestamps tell the story I didn't have to. By day 8, the tone changed. Panic matures quickly when it isn't fed reassurance. The messages stopped pretending to care about me. They started revealing what they were actually afraid of. His assistant called first. She had always been efficient, warm, but not foolish. A woman who knew how to manage powerful men without appearing to challenge them. "Emily," she said, using my name like a peace offering. "I hope you're well. We're just having trouble reaching you." I didn't respond. She called again that afternoon, then again the next morning. On the 3rd attempt, her voice changed. "Some documents need your signature," she said, carefully neutral. "Time-sensitive ones." I smiled to myself. Time-sensitive is what people say when time is already running out. I spent that week doing something radical. Nothing. I slept when I wanted, ate what I felt like, walked without checking my phone. I bought groceries without mentally accounting for his preferences. I rearranged a room without asking what made sense, long-term. Do you know how disorienting freedom feels when you've been trained to justify every choice? It doesn't feel euphoric at first. It feels quiet, then unfamiliar, then expensive, because you realize how much of yourself you gave away for convenience. I didn't rush to fill the space. I let it echo. On day 10, his mother showed up. Not at my door. She didn't know where I was. She showed up where she knew I would eventually feel it. My phone. She left a voicemail that lasted almost 4 minutes. The first 30 seconds were soft, maternal, concerned. "You know how sensitive he is," she said. "This isn't the way to handle conflict." By minute 2, the gloves came off. "You're embarrassing him. People are talking. This affects the family." There it was. Not your marriage, not your well-being. The family. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. I wasn't raised to worship other people's legacies. I went to the bank in person the next day. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to see their faces when they realized I wasn't confused anymore. The man who greeted me had been polite to the point of dismissal for years. He always spoke to my husband, even when I was standing right there. This time, he stood. "Mrs. Carter," he said, respectful, careful. "Please, come in." Funny how posture changes when leverage shifts. I asked for full documentation. Every account. Every transfer. Every restriction that had ever been justified, for my protection. He hesitated. Then he complied. Paper has a way of telling the truth without emotion. What I saw wasn't illegal. That would have been easier. It was strategic. Layered permissions. Quiet barriers. Decisions framed as efficiency. I hadn't been locked out. I'd been guided away. That's how intelligent control works. It doesn't force. It persuades. I thanked him for his time and walked out with copies. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. That night, my husband called again. This time, he tried a new approach. "You've made your point," he said. "Now let's be adults." Adults. Another favorite word. It usually means, come back to where I have the advantage. I didn't leave to make a point, I replied. I left because I heard one. A pause. Then a sigh. Practiced. Familiar. You're blowing this out of proportion. There it was, the sentence that shrinks women and absolves men in one breath. I'm responding in exact proportion, I said. You're just not used to being on the receiving end. He went quiet. That silence wasn't confusion. It was recalculation. The next move came through his lawyer. A clean email, neutral subject line, no emotion, request for discussion. They wanted to clarify misunderstandings and restore normal operations. Operations. That's what I had been. I forwarded the email to a lawyer of my own, a woman, older than me, sharp in a way that didn't seek approval. She read everything, the documents, the emails, the timeline. Then she looked at me and said one sentence. He underestimated you. Yes, but more importantly, he had exposed himself. Here's something people don't tell you. When someone builds their power on your compliance, they don't prepare for your absence. They assume you'll return before the system breaks. Every call I ignored forced someone else to act. Every delay created friction. Every unanswered question demanded accountability. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being unavailable, and that was destabilizing. By the end of the second week, I heard through someone else that his boss was concerned. Concerned men make mistakes. They talk too much, promise too quickly, blame the wrong people. I still didn't reach out. Let them feel it. I had spent years cushioning consequences that weren't mine to absorb. I was done being the buffer. One night, alone in that quiet apartment, I stood in front of the mirror. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Eyes steady. I didn't look like someone in crisis. I looked like someone who had stopped negotiating her reality. And I realized something that landed hard and stayed. He didn't challenge me because he believed I was weak. He challenged me because he was afraid I'd find out I wasn't. And now? The calls weren't about me surviving without him. They were about him realizing he couldn't function without the version of me he controlled. That version was gone, and in its place was someone he had never prepared for. Not a wife, not a dependent, a problem. And next, I would decide what kind. The third week is when people stop pretending. That's the week the mask slips, not dramatically, but through small, telling errors. A wrong word, a rushed decision, a tone that betrays urgency. Control doesn't like waiting, and I made them wait. I didn't hear from my husband directly anymore. He had outsourced me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Men like him don't apologize. They delegate resolution. They let intermediaries soften the ground, carry the risk, absorb the anger. It allows them to maintain the illusion of reasonableness. If things go well, they take credit. If things go badly, they deny involvement. Classic. The first intermediary was his lawyer again. A follow-up email. Polite, persistent, framed as concern for mutual interests. I didn't respond. The second was his sister. That one almost worked, because she tried to sound human. Emily, I know things are complicated, she said on voicemail. But this silence is hurting him. He's not sleeping. He's under a lot of pressure. Pressure. As if pressure had ever been a compelling reason for me to return to my place. I deleted the message. You learn something very specific when you stop reacting. People begin to show you what they actually believe about you. They stop asking what you need and start demanding what you owe. By week 3, the language shifted. Not, are you okay? But this has gone far enough. Not, let's talk. But, we need to resolve this. Resolve. Another word that assumes your consent. I met with my lawyer again. Same chair, same office, same steady gaze. I told her everything that had happened since we last spoke. The calls, the emails, the sudden concern. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. What do you want? Not what was fair, not what was reasonable, what I wanted. The question stopped me. I had spent so long negotiating within boundaries he set that I hadn't considered the possibility of choosing outside them. I want access, I said finally. Not permission, not allowances. Access. She nodded. And? She pressed. I want separation without chaos, I added. And I want it clean. She smiled, just slightly. That, she said, is exactly what they're afraid of. That afternoon, the bank called again. Different person this time. Senior title, measured voice. They wanted to confirm my intentions. Interesting phrasing. I told him I intended to review all joint financial structures with independent counsel. There was a pause. Then, of course, that's your right. Rights feel very real once you stop asking to exercise them. Here's what most people don't understand. Power doesn't disappear when you walk away. It relocates. Every system my husband had built relied on predictability, on me being where I was expected to be, saying what I was expected to say, signing when I was expected to sign. My absence created variables, and variables terrify systems designed around control. Midweek, I received a message that finally broke the pattern. It wasn't professional. It wasn't polite. It was angry. You're enjoying this, he wrote. Dragging this out, watching everyone scramble. There it was. Projection. The assumption that I was playing a game because he would have. I read the message twice. Then I typed one sentence. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm observing. I didn't add punctuation. I didn't explain. Observation is threatening when you're used to being the narrator. That night, I dreamed of our house. Not the way it looked, but the way it felt. Every room arranged for efficiency, for appearance, for approval. I woke up with a realization that landed heavier than any call. I had been living inside a performance, and the audience had always been him. The next day, his boss called again. This time, I answered. Not because I owed him anything, because I wanted to hear the shift for myself. Emily, he said, too warmly. I hope I'm not intruding. You are, I replied calmly. But go ahead. A pause, a recalibration. He spoke about concern, about stress, about how my husband was distracted. Then, he made his mistake. This situation, he said, is starting to raise questions. Questions. From who? He didn't say. He didn't have to. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. About what? I asked. Another pause. About stability, he said. I smiled. My stability isn't the issue, I said. You're calling because his is. He didn't deny it. Men in power rarely do when cornered gently. After that call, something in me settled. Not hardened. Clarified. I stopped wondering if I was overreacting. I stopped second-guessing my tone. The evidence was everywhere. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the consequences of losing access to me. By Friday, the pressure escalated. A draft agreement appeared in my inbox. Unrequested. Unnegotiated. Terms, timelines, expectations. They had already decided how this would end. They just needed me to sign. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment. She called me within 10 minutes. They're rushing, she said. That's good for us. Us. I liked the sound of that. That evening, alone again, I poured a glass of wine I bought myself. I thought about the woman I had been 3 weeks earlier, the one standing in a marble kitchen, being told she couldn't last a week. I didn't hate her. I respected her. She had done what she needed to do to survive in a narrow space. But I was done living narrow. He called late that night, not angry this time, tired. You've made your statement, he said. What more do you want from me? The question was almost sincere. Almost. I don't want anything from you, I said. I want things untangled. He exhaled sharply. You're acting like this is some kind of reckoning. I let the silence answer for me. Here's the truth he didn't want to hear. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. The moment I stepped out of my assigned role, the structure revealed how much it depended on my silence. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. By the end of the 3rd week, one thing was clear. He had underestimated not just my endurance, but my restraint. I wasn't burning anything down. I was removing my hands. And without them, the machine was starting to shake. Next, they would try to rush me. After that, they would try to scare me. And after that, they would finally realize something irreversible. I was no longer reacting to their moves. They were reacting to mine. Fear is always the next tactic. Not loud fear. Not threats shouted across a room. Refined fear. Legal fear. Reputational fear. The kind that arrives wrapped in concern and paperwork. It started with an email from a firm I'd never heard of. Subject line: Notice of potential exposure. That's how they phrase intimidation when they want to sound respectable. The body of the email was long, dense, carefully worded to sound neutral while implying catastrophe. They were concerned that my absence and lack of communication could be interpreted as instability, that my behavior might raise questions in the event of formal proceedings. That silence, while legal, could be misconstrued. Misconstrued by whom? They never say. Fear works better when it's vague. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She responded with one sentence. They're bluffing. I felt my shoulders drop for the first time all day. The second attempt came through someone unexpected. A woman I'd once considered a friend. She called me crying. I didn't want to get involved, she said. But he's not doing well. He's saying things. What kind of things? I asked calmly. That you're having some sort of breakdown, she whispered. That you're being influenced. That he's worried about your mental health. There it was. The oldest play in the book. When a woman stops complying, question her sanity. I closed my eyes and breathed once before responding. And you believed him? A pause. I didn't know what to think, she said. I did. I'm fine, I replied. And if he's telling people otherwise, that's something he'll have to answer for. She didn't cry after that. She apologized. Apologies are common when people realize they've been used as tools. That night, I sat very still. Fear had arrived, just as I knew it would. But here's what surprised me. It didn't work. Not because I was brave, because I was prepared. Fear only functions when it introduces uncertainty. I already knew exactly what he was capable of. The next escalation was formal. A letter. Delivered. Heavy paper. Impressive letterhead. It suggested mediation. Strongly. It also suggested that if mediation failed, other options might be explored. Other options is legal shorthand for we will make this unpleasant. I read it once. Then again. Then I placed it neatly in a folder labeled Attempts. There is power in documentation. Power doesn't panic. It records. He finally broke his silence that night. Not through lawyers, not through family. Direct. You're forcing my hand, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was strain underneath. You always had hands, I replied. You're just not used to resistance. He exhaled sharply. You're damaging your own position. That made me laugh. A single quiet breath of amusement. My position? I said. I don't think you understand. I don't have a position anymore. I stepped out of the structure entirely. He went silent. Men like him hate when the game board disappears. Do you know what people are saying? He asked, finally. Yes, I said. And I know who they're saying it to. He stiffened. I could hear it. That was the moment he realized I wasn't isolated. Isolation only works when you're quiet and ashamed. I was neither. Let me tell you something clearly. Fear loses its grip the moment you stop trying to look innocent. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my intentions. I didn't reassure anyone. I let facts exist without commentary. That unnerves people more than denial ever could. By the end of that week, the tone changed again. The threats softened. The urgency returned. Now they wanted a mutually beneficial resolution. Now they wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. Avoid. As if conflict hadn't already happened. As if it hadn't been carefully engineered long before I left. I met my lawyer the next morning. She laid everything out on the table. They'll try one more thing, she said. They'll try to rush you into agreement under the guise of protection. I nodded. I know, I said. And when that doesn't work? She smiled. Then they'll show you who they really are. That afternoon, I did something deliberate. I sent one message. Not emotional, not defensive. Clear. All communication will go through counsel. Any attempts to question my mental fitness or apply pressure through third parties will be documented. That was it. No flourish. No threats. Boundaries don't need decoration. The effect was immediate. The noise dropped. Not because they respected me, because they understood the risk had shifted. When fear fails, people retreat to self-preservation. That night, alone again, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was alert. And alertness is far more dangerous than rage. He had tried to scare me back into my role. It hadn't worked. So next, he would try to tempt me, offer comfort, offer nostalgia, offer us. That's when I would have to be most careful. Because fear is obvious. But comfort? Comfort is where women are trained to betray themselves. And I wasn't going to make that mistake. Not after seeing how quickly fear gave way to strategy. Not after understanding exactly what my absence had exposed. The machine was still shaking. And the more it shook, the more pieces started falling off. I knew it was coming. Fear had failed. Pressure had failed. So he reached for something softer. The message arrived on a Sunday morning. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just him. I miss you. 4 words, carefully chosen, familiar, loaded. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say I was wrong. He said I miss you, as if absence were the issue, not disrespect. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message. Do you remember how we used to have coffee on Sundays? There it was. Nostalgia. Selective memory is a powerful drug. It edits out the power imbalance and leaves only warmth. It frames endurance as intimacy. It repackages survival as love. I let the phone sit face down on the table. Memory is not an obligation. That evening, he called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But I wanted to hear the tone. Emily, he said, quietly this time. I don't want this to turn into something ugly. Neither did I. But ugliness doesn't begin with endings. It begins with entitlement. You didn't want ugly when you challenged me, I said. You wanted obedience. A pause. That's not fair. No, I replied. It's accurate. He tried a different angle. We built a life together, he said. You can't just walk away like it meant nothing. I closed my eyes. That life, I said, was built around your comfort. I was a feature, not a foundation. Silence. This kind of silence isn't absence. It's injury. I gave you everything, he said finally. There it was. The lie people tell themselves to justify control. You gave me access, I said. On your terms. That's not everything. He exhaled, frustrated now. What do you want me to say? I thought about that. I want you to stop trying to pull me back into a version of myself that benefited you, I said. And I want you to accept that I saw through it. Another long pause. You're really doing this, he said. Not a question. Yes. That night, I dreamed of the first year of our marriage, the small apartment, the laughter, the optimism. And then I remembered something I hadn't allowed myself to name before. Even then, decisions flowed one direction. I had mistaken certainty for safety. The next morning, flowers arrived. Expensive, white, carefully arranged. No note. Of course not. Apologies require accountability. Gifts require nothing. I gave them to the doorman. By midweek, the messages turned philosophical. Marriage isn't about independence, he wrote. It's about compromise. Compromise only works when both people have equal leverage. What he meant was accommodation. I didn't reply. That was when he made his most revealing move. He sent me a draft, not legal, personal, a letter he'd written from the heart. It spoke about stress, pressure, expectations placed on him, How lonely he felt carrying responsibility. How much he needed me beside him. Not once did it mention the challenge. Not once did it acknowledge the control. It positioned him as burdened, overworked, misunderstood, and me? Absent, cold, unreasonable. I read it carefully. Then I closed the document. I finally understood something with brutal clarity. He didn't miss me. He missed the woman who absorbed his weight without complaint. I met my lawyer again. I showed her the messages. She didn't look surprised. "This is the reconciliation phase," she said. "It happens when dominance fails." "Does it ever work?" I asked. "Only when the woman doubts herself," she replied. I didn't. That night, I sent my final direct message to him. One sentence. "I'm not returning to the marriage as it was, and I'm not negotiating my clarity." That was it. No warmth, no cruelty, just truth. The response came quickly. Anger now. Sharp. Defensive. "So that's it?" he wrote. "You're throwing everything away." I stared at the screen. "No," I typed. "I'm reclaiming it." After that, the messages stopped. Completely. The comfort phase was over. What comes next is never pretty. When someone realizes they can't pull you back with fear, pressure, or nostalgia, they don't reach for love. They reach for control by force. And I was ready. Because I wasn't standing in reaction anymore. I was standing in position. And position changes everything. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. My credit card declined at a grocery store. Nothing extravagant. Bread, coffee, eggs. The cashier looked at me with mild sympathy. I smiled, paid with another card, and walked out without breaking stride. But I understood the message immediately. This wasn't financial trouble. This was a test. Within the hour, an email arrived from his lawyer. Temporary account adjustments pending review. Temporary, pending. 2 words designed to sound neutral while asserting dominance. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment. She called me within minutes. "He's trying to reassert control," she said. "And he's doing it clumsily." I felt calm, almost bored. "He thinks inconvenience will make me panic," I said. "Yes," she replied, "because panic is what always worked before." Let me be clear about something. I wasn't surprised. When persuasion fails, control doesn't disappear. It escalates. This was never about reconciliation. It was about re-establishing hierarchy. The next move came through the house. Our house. I received a notification from the security company. Access updated. My access restricted. He hadn't locked me out completely. That would have been obvious. He'd limited me. Partial access is more humiliating. It sends a message without admitting intent. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Out loud this time. He was still playing the same game. He just didn't realize the board had flipped. I documented everything. Time, date, screenshots, emails, not emotionally, methodically. Power doesn't shout. It prepares. That evening, he called. No greeting. "You're making this worse than it needs to be," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "You restricted my access to shared assets," I replied. "That's not de-escalation." "You left," he snapped. "You don't get to keep everything like nothing changed." There it was. Punishment framed as consequence. "I didn't abandon my rights," I said. "I exercised them." Silence. Then, colder. "You're forcing me to protect myself." "From me." Interesting choice of words. "Do what you need to do," I replied. "Just understand that everything you do from this point forward is being recorded." His breath hitched. That was the moment he realized this wasn't a private power struggle anymore. It was becoming a liability. The following morning, my lawyer sent a letter. Formal, precise, unemotional. It outlined unauthorized restrictions, implied coercion, and noted a pattern of retaliatory behavior. It didn't threaten. It documented. By noon, the credit card worked again. By evening, access was restored. Control doesn't like light. But he wasn't done. People like him never are. The next tactic was social. Invitations disappeared. Events I'd once been expected at quietly removed me from guest lists. Mutual acquaintances grew distant, not hostile, cautious. He was shaping the narrative, the abandoned wife, the unstable one, the one who walked away for no reason. I let it happen, because truth doesn't need early witnesses. It needs records. Then came the threat he thought would finally work. "You should think carefully about how this looks," he said in a message. "People talk." I read it twice. Then I typed back. "They already are. That's why I'm not guessing anymore." I didn't elaborate. Men who rely on reputation fear specificity. Something shifted after that. The moves became inconsistent. He rushed some things, delayed others. Control requires coherence. He was losing it. One night, very late, I sat alone and felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, grief, not for him. For the years I'd spent believing restraint was loyalty. That silence was maturity. That minimizing myself was partnership. I let the grief pass through me without resistance. Then I stood up and turned off the light. The next morning brought the biggest escalation yet. A notice. Formal. Legal. He had filed for separation, unilaterally, on his terms, without discussion, without warning. This was supposed to scare me. It didn't. It clarified everything. I called my lawyer. She was already reading it. "He's trying to control the timeline now," she said. "He wants to move fast before scrutiny deepens." "Good," I replied. "Let's move faster." She paused, then smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Here's the truth he hadn't accounted for. I wasn't reacting to his actions anymore. I was anticipating them. Every move he made confirmed the same thing. He never wanted partnership. He wanted possession. And once possession fails, exposure begins. The separation filing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of formal daylight. And daylight is unforgiving to men who've spent years operating in shadow. He thought force would restore order. Instead, it marked the moment he stepped into territory where control doesn't matter. Only facts do. And facts? Facts don't care who used to hold the power. When I saw the separation notice, I didn't feel shock. I felt confirmation, the kind that settles in your chest and stays there. This was no longer emotional territory. This was procedural. And procedure is where men like him believe they excel. He filed quickly, strategically, on a Friday. That wasn't accidental. Friday filings are designed to steal momentum, to trap you in a weekend with no immediate response, no counters, no noise, just time to doubt yourself. I didn't. I forwarded the notice to my lawyer and went about my day. I cooked dinner. I went for a walk. I slept well. Nothing rattles control more than realizing the other person isn't spiraling. Monday morning, we responded. Not defensively, not reactively, precisely. Our response was longer, slower, more thorough. We acknowledged the filing. We rejected the framing. We requested disclosures, full disclosures, the kind that turn efficient systems into very long conversations. By noon, his lawyer called mine. Not angry, concerned. They always are, once they realize the terrain has shifted. "We didn't expect this level of scrutiny," he said. My lawyer smiled when she told me that later. "That's because they expected compliance," she said. "Not competence." Here's something I learned quickly. Men who control quietly rely on invisibility. They don't shout. They don't threaten openly. They arrange things so no one ever looks too closely. Scrutiny is their kryptonite, and separation proceedings invite it by design. Within days, requests went out. Financial records, asset histories, decision logs, nothing accusatory, just comprehensive. He resisted, of course. Delays, clarifications, requests for extensions, each one documented. Each one noticed. The court doesn't respond well to patterns. He called me again midweek. This time he sounded offended. "You didn't have to make it adversarial," he said. I closed my eyes briefly. "You filed without speaking to me," I replied. "That was adversarial." That was necessary, he snapped. No, I said. It was controlling. Silence. Then, quieter. You're changing. Yes, I said. That's the point. The social narrative shifted next. Subtly at first. People stopped asking what happened. They started asking how long this would take. That question always comes when discomfort sets in. When people realize the story isn't resolving quickly enough for their liking. I didn't feed it. I let the silence grow teeth. Behind the scenes, things were moving. Accounts were being untangled. Permissions examined. Patterns noticed. My lawyer never dramatized anything. She didn't need to. The paperwork did that on its own. There was one moment, small, telling, that stayed with me. We were reviewing a series of transactions he'd labeled routine. My lawyer paused. Why were these approved without your acknowledgement? She asked. I was told they didn't require it, I said. She nodded slowly. They did, she replied. Every time. That was it. No theatrics. Just a fact, sitting there. Facts don't shout. They wait. That night I felt something shift again, not externally. Internally. I stopped thinking of this as a fight. It wasn't. It was a process of visibility, and visibility is irreversible. He tried one more time to appeal to reason. Dragging this out will hurt both of us, he said. I answered calmly. It's only dragging because you're resisting clarity. He didn't respond after that. By the end of the week, the calls slowed, the messages shortened, the confidence thinned. This wasn't the battlefield he knew. There were no shortcuts here, no leverage disguised as concern, just systems designed to reveal truth over time. And time? Time was no longer on his side. I stood at my window one evening and watched the city settle into night. Lights turning on, one by one. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed peace came from minimizing friction. She had survived by smoothing edges. I was surviving by refusing to, and that difference changed everything. The paperwork had stopped being symbolic. It was now operational, and with every page turned, every request logged, every delay noted. The story was no longer something he could manage. It was something he had to answer to. Next, the pressure wouldn't come from me. It would come from the systems he'd trusted to protect him. And systems are loyal to rules, not to men who believe they're above them. There's a sound pressure makes when it changes direction. You don't hear it all at once. You feel it, in pauses, in delays, in people suddenly choosing their words more carefully. That's when I knew it wasn't just us anymore. The system had started looking back at him. It began quietly. A request for clarification, then another, then a formal notice using language that no longer assumed goodwill. Nothing dramatic. But the tone shifted. Systems don't accuse, they observe, and observation is lethal to people who rely on obscurity. My lawyer called me one morning with a rare edge in her voice. They're asking questions now, she said. Who's they? I asked. She smiled faintly. People who weren't involved before. That was enough. Here's what people misunderstand about wealth and influence. It doesn't protect you from scrutiny. It delays it. And delay only works when no one insists on completeness. I had insisted. The disclosures started coming in. Slowly, selectively. Too selectively. Accounts that didn't quite line up. Transfers justified vaguely. Structures explained as customary. Customary for whom? Not for me. And now, apparently, not for them either. He called again after that. Short call. Tight voice. They're asking things they don't need to, he said. They're asking exactly what they're supposed to, I replied. You didn't have to push this far. That word again. Push. As if truth were an act of aggression. I didn't push, I said. I stopped stepping back. Silence. The next escalation didn't come from him. It came from his boss. Not a call this time. A meeting request. Declined. Not because I was afraid. Because nothing destabilizes authority like realizing it no longer has access. Something else changed that week. People stopped calling me concerned. They started calling me careful. That word travels fast when narratives shift. Careful implies intention. Control doesn't like intention in others. Behind closed doors, things were unraveling. I didn't see it directly. I felt it through timing, delays that had never existed before, caution where there used to be confidence, language that softened itself mid-sentence. He was adjusting. Not to me. To oversight. One afternoon, my lawyer slid a document across the table. "Read this carefully," she said. It was a request. From outside the immediate proceedings. Neutral. Formal. They wanted clarification on certain financial practices. Not accusations. Questions. The most dangerous kind. I read it once. Then again. Then, I looked up. "This isn't about the separation anymore," I said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." That night I didn't feel victorious. I felt sober. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And consequences don't care how justified you feel. They just arrive. He tried once more to reach me privately. Late. Too late. "We need to talk," he said. Off record. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. There is no off record once the system starts watching. I slept better after that. Not because I was relieved. Because I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. He was. And it showed. By the end of that week, the separation wasn't the central issue in the room. Transparency was. And transparency changes power dynamics in ways nothing else can. You can negotiate emotion. You can manipulate loyalty. But you cannot negotiate facts once they're illuminated. I stood in my kitchen now, wherever that happened to be, and poured coffee. I thought about the challenge he'd thrown at me weeks ago. "You wouldn't last a week without me." He'd been wrong in the most telling way possible. I hadn't just lasted. I had removed myself from the shadows, and in doing so, I had exposed how much of his strength depended on my silence. The system was watching now, and systems don't blink. Next? Next would be the part he couldn't charm, rush, or intimidate. The part where explanations stop working, and accountability, quiet, procedural, inevitable, takes their place. There's a point where control stops negotiating, not because it wants to, but because it has to. That's when questions stop being polite. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain envelope. No flourish. No intimidation. Just wait. It wasn't addressed to us. It wasn't framed as marital. It was addressed to him, and I was copied. That detail mattered. The language was dry. Surgical. Please provide clarification regarding the following. No assumptions. No accusations. Just numbered paragraphs and deadlines. Deadlines change people. They strip away charm. They expose habits. He called within an hour. Not angry. Unsteady. "They're overreaching," he said. "This isn't their scope." "Then clarity should be easy," I replied. "You don't understand how these things work." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I understand exactly how they work," I said. "That's why they're asking." Silence. This wasn't the silence of strategy. This was the silence of someone recalculating under pressure. The second letter came 3 days later. Sharper. Still neutral, but firmer. Additional documentation requested. Expanded timeframe. Broader scope. The system doesn't escalate emotionally. It escalates logically. I watched him change from a distance. His messages shortened. His confidence thinned. His attempts to explain grew more frequent. Explanation is what people reach for when authority stops accepting tone as evidence. "You could stop this," he said one night. I was calm. "So could you," I replied, "by answering honestly." He exhaled hard. "You think you're clean in all this?" There it was. The reach. The attempt to blur. "I think transparency applies to everyone," I said, "including me." That answer unsettled him, because it meant I wasn't afraid of scrutiny. Only people with something to hide fear the light indiscriminately. Let me be very clear. I wasn't orchestrating his downfall. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't retaliating. I had simply stepped aside and refused to intercept consequences that were never meant for me to absorb. That's all. And it was enough. The next move came from someone I hadn't expected. His father. A voicemail. Long, controlled, disappointed. "This has gone too far," he said. "Families handle things privately." I deleted it halfway through. Privacy is a privilege, not a shield. Behind the scenes, the requests multiplied. Parallel inquiries, overlapping interests. No hysteria, just process. He tried to keep up. He tried to manage optics. But process doesn't care how things look. It cares how they align. And alignment was slipping. One afternoon, my lawyer looked up from a document and said something quietly devastating. "They're not satisfied with his responses." I nodded. "What happens next?" I asked. "They ask again," she said. "And this time, they're more specific." Specificity is unforgiving. It doesn't leave room for narratives. He stopped calling after that. Not out of dignity, out of focus. When pressure consolidates, people conserve energy. They stop talking. They start surviving. The bank called me later that week. Different tone than before. Not cautious. Formal. They wanted confirmation, again, of authorizations, of timelines, of awareness. I answered calmly, truthfully, without elaboration. When the call ended, I sat very still. This wasn't about my marriage anymore. This was about architecture. And architecture, once examined, reveals intent. That night, something unexpected happened. I felt sorry for him. Not because he was losing control, but because he had mistaken control for safety, and now that illusion was collapsing. But sympathy is not intervention. I didn't reach out. I didn't soften. I let the system do what it was designed to do. The following week, a notice arrived that changed the temperature of everything. A review. Formal. Open-ended. No guarantees. Just oversight. He didn't tell me about it. I found out another way. Silence can be very loud when you know what it means. I stood by the window again, watching the city move without me. And I understood something final. He had built his life on the assumption that I would always be there to smooth edges, to absorb friction, to make things presentable. Without me? The edges cut, the friction sparked, and the presentation collapsed. He had challenged me once, casually, cruelly. "You wouldn't last a week without me." What he never considered, what he couldn't afford to consider, was how much he depended on the quiet labor of my compliance. That labor was over. And now, the questions weren't coming from me. They were coming from places he couldn't charm, threaten, or outweight. Places that don't care who you are, only what you did. Next? Next would be the moment when answers stop being strategic and start being necessary. And necessity? Necessity has no patience for control. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when a person realizes they can't maneuver anymore. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack resources, but because every direction now leads to the same place. Exposure. I knew it had reached that point when he stopped trying to control me, and started trying to control time. Deadlines suddenly mattered to him. Extensions were requested with urgency. Language tightened, shortened. When someone who once took his time starts asking for more of it, you know the ground has shifted. The call came from his lawyer first. Not aggressive. Careful. "We'd like to streamline this," he said, "for everyone's sake." Streamline is what people say when complexity no longer favors them. "For whose sake?" my lawyer asked calmly. A pause. "Both parties," he said. She smiled. "Then full compliance would help," she replied. "We're still waiting." He didn't call me that day, or the next. Silence returned, but not the strategic kind. This silence was crowded. Behind the scenes, requests turned into requirements. Clarifications became demands. The language lost its courtesy, not because the system was angry, because patience had expired. I received a notice late one afternoon. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just factual. Certain privileges were being reviewed. Temporarily. That word again. Temporary is what people cling to when permanence feels too close. He finally called that night. His voice was different, not sharp, not controlled, smaller. "They're misinterpreting things," he said. "You know how complicated this is." I leaned back and listened. "I know exactly how complicated it is," I replied. "That's why it's being examined." "You could help clear this up," he said quietly. There it was, the ask, not explicit, not direct, but unmistakable. "You want me to intervene?" I said. A pause. "Yes," he admitted. "Just provide context." Context, another word for cushioning. "I won't," I said, not harsh, final. "You don't have to do this," he said. I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm not interfering anymore." Silence. Then something raw slipped through. "You're really going to let this destroy me?" There it was, the moment he framed consequence as cruelty. I answered carefully. "I'm letting truth stand on its own." That call ended without resolution. Not because I hung up, because there was nothing left to negotiate. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. No messages. No updates. That's when I knew things were no longer theoretical. They were operational. I felt it in my body before I saw it on paper. A tension release. The kind that comes when responsibility finally leaves your shoulders. I hadn't realized how much of his weight I'd been carrying until I wasn't. The confirmation came through my lawyer. Measured tone. Professional restraint. "He's been asked to formally account for several discrepancies," she said. "Under oath." Under oath. Those words change posture. They strip away performance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. This wasn't victory. This was inevitability. He sent one last message that week. Not pleading. Not angry. Resigned. "I never thought you'd let it go this far." I read it once, then typed my final response. I didn't take it this far. I stepped out of the way. After that, there was nothing. No follow-up. No rebuttal. No attempt at reconciliation. The room had closed. That night, I sat alone and thought about the woman I'd been when this started. The one who flinched at raised eyebrows. The one who smoothed conversations before they sharpened. The one who believed being reasonable would protect her. She had done her best with the information she had. I wasn't ashamed of her, but I was no longer her. Here's what I know now. When someone challenges your ability to survive without them, they're revealing a belief. Not about you, about themselves. They believe they are the structure. They believe they are the ceiling and the floor. They never imagine what happens when you walk out and the walls start answering questions. He had run out of room. Not because I pushed, because the space he operated in required my silence to exist. Without it, everything echoed, and echoes attract attention. Next would be the part no one can negotiate away, the part where conclusions are drawn, decisions are made, and consequences stop being theoretical. Because once the room closes, it doesn't reopen for explanations. It only opens for outcomes. Outcomes don't announce themselves. They don't crash through doors or demand attention. They arrive the way truth usually does. Plain, undeniable, and late enough that denial no longer works. I didn't hear it from him. That mattered. I heard it through my lawyer, in a voice that stayed deliberately neutral even as the meaning settled into the room. "There's been a determination," she said. "Not a problem, not a complication. A determination. That word is final in a way nothing else is. The findings didn't use emotional language. They never do. They didn't talk about intention or stress or misunderstanding. They talked about patterns, consistency, omissions, responsibility. They talked about what was, not what was meant. That's the part people like him never prepare for. Certain privileges were suspended. Temporarily, they said. But temporary loses its comfort once it's attached to conditions. Conditions require compliance. Compliance requires humility. And humility had never been his strength. I sat very still as my lawyer explained what came next. Reviews, oversight, limitations. Nothing theatrical, Nothing that would make headlines. Just the slow narrowing of space. Power doesn't usually disappear. It constricts. He didn't reach out. Not that day. Not the next. Silence stretched. Not strategic. Not manipulative. Just empty. That told me more than any apology ever could. I thought I would feel vindicated. I didn't. I felt clear. Clear about what had happened. Clear about what I had carried. Clear about what I would never carry again. The separation proceedings shifted tone after that. Not hostile. Careful. He stopped posturing. Stopped pushing. Stopped trying to frame the narrative. People do that when they realize the story no longer belongs to them. One afternoon, my lawyer looked at me and said something that stayed. "You know," she said, "this only unfolded because you didn't rush to defend yourself." She was right. Defense implies guilt. I had refused to perform innocence. I had let the truth exist without choreography. A week later, a final document arrived. Dry, efficient. It outlined next steps, not suggestions, requirements. I signed where appropriate. No hesitation. No shaking hands. The woman who once needed permission was gone. I never got an apology. Not a real one. But I got something more honest. Distance. The house, the old one, was being prepared for sale. I didn't go back. I didn't need closure from rooms that had already told me everything. One night, alone, I thought about the challenge that started all of this. You wouldn't last a week without me. I understood it now in its full shape. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. He believed my survival depended on his structure because his depended on my silence. When I left, I didn't collapse. The structure did. Slowly. Quietly. Exactly the way control always collapses. Under scrutiny. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window. The city moved on. Unimpressed. Uninvolved. Life doesn't stop for anyone's ego. This wasn't a victory story. It was a clarity story. One where nothing needed to explode for everything to change. One where a woman stopped intercepting consequences and let them land where they belonged. There was only one part left now. The part after outcome. The part where you decide what kind of life grows in the space that control once occupied. And that decision would be entirely mine. What came next was quieter than anyone would expect, and stronger for it. The first thing I did was nothing that looked impressive. I chose my own routine. I woke up without anticipating someone else's mood. I made decisions without rehearsing how I'd justify them. I spent money without hearing an internal audit voice asking if it was necessary. That alone felt radical. You don't realize how much of your life is pre-negotiated until negotiation ends. I didn't rush into freedom like it was a performance. I didn't announce anything. I let my life become unremarkable again. In the best way. Peace doesn't advertise itself. People reached out slowly. Some curious. Some apologetic. Some embarrassed. I accepted none of it personally. When systems collapse, bystanders look for somewhere safe to stand. I wasn't interested in being that place. One afternoon, months later, I ran into someone who asked the question everyone eventually asks. Do you regret how it ended? I didn't answer right away. Not because it was complicated, because it deserved precision. I regret how long I mistook control for security, I said. I don't regret leaving it. They nodded. Some truths don't need elaboration. Here's what I learned when everything finally went quiet. Strength isn't loud. Power isn't dramatic. Freedom isn't performative. Freedom is waking up without bracing yourself. I rebuilt slowly. Not upward. Inward. I took work I chose. I formed friendships that didn't require self-erasure. I built boundaries that didn't apologize for existing. Nothing glamorous. Nothing fragile. Just solid. Occasionally, I heard updates. Muted consequences. Ongoing limitations. A life that had narrowed. I didn't ask questions. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. And distance is the most honest ending there is. One night, long after everything had settled, I stood in my kitchen. Another one. Smaller. Mine. And remembered the challenge again. You wouldn't last a week without me. I smiled then. Not with bitterness, with clarity. He thought survival meant access to his structure. I learned survival meant removing myself from it. And once I did, everything that had been propped up by my silence had to stand on its own. Some things couldn't. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. When someone challenges your independence, they are confessing their fear of your autonomy. They are telling you exactly where your power lives. Listen, I didn't win. I didn't lose. I exited. And in that exit, I found something far more valuable than being right. I found myself uncontained, unmanaged, unchallenged, and fully, unmistakably free.